I'm Brian Nash from How We Got Here Genealogy, and today on this video, I'm going to answer a question from one of my favorite YouTubers, and that's Bruce Fumey of Scottish History Tours. Bruce does this magical thing every Friday night while I'm sleeping. He's putting up a video on YouTube, so when I wake up Saturday morning, I get to be informed and entertained by it. And in today's video, he asked this question.
Let me ask you a question. What does Scottish history mean to you?
And I want to answer it. But first I want to say, no matter what your ethnic heritage is, where your ancestors are from, you can answer this question too. It's a really important one. So just change the word Scotland for whatever country they're from. To me, it means everything. In fact, it's one of the reasons I started my YouTube channel. Not just Scottish history, but basically the history of my ancestors. I'm half Scottish, half Irish. My mom's side's Scottish Presbyterian, my dad's side's Irish Catholic. So I consider myself to be a Celtic Canadian. So one of the things I wanted to do with my YouTube channel is be able to help people to understand and research their own family history so they can put it in perspective of grander history of the world, of a country, of a community. And part of that, you have to know that history. So it's really important, I think, for people to understand the history of the places their family came from. Not just for the knowledge, but for an understanding of where they actually come from. Because I have a saying, and it's the reason my channel is called How We Got Here, because if you don't know how you got here, you don't know where you're going. It's part of the trip. Like I said, I'm Scottish on my mother's side. The most recent Scottish immigrant was from 1905. My grandfather's, my mother's father's mother, so my great-grandmother, she came to Canada when she was 13 years old in 1905. The rest of my maternal grandfather's family and my maternal grandmother's family actually came from Scotland before 1840. My grandfather's father's family had been living in the area around Glasgow. They arrived in Canada in 1832. His mother's side, like I said, came in 1905. They were from Edinburgh area. My mother's family came from the Western Isles and Highlands of Scotland. And they all came in the early 1800s, like I said, before 1840. One of the things they all have in common, including my great-grandmother, who came here in 1905, is they all came as a result of the clearances in Scotland. I know what you're saying. If you've watched Bruce's videos, you know when the Highland clearances are, and you know about them. And if you haven't watched his videos, do that. He's really informative, and he tells it in a very entertaining way. He's got several videos. But even her family had moved from where they had lived in a rural setting to Edinburgh to work in the coal mines and industries around Edinburgh before they came over to Canada, where her father came over with her older brother. She already had another older brother that had already been here for a few years before, and they worked in the coal mines. In fact, my grandfather's other side of the family came here in 1832 and started and worked in and eventually managed some of the first coal mines in Cape Breton. In fact, coal mining is so deep in that side of the family that family had, in every generation thereafter, a large number of their children. It did slowly wean off, but you'd find coal miners. You'll find coal miners in that family. In fact, they even outlasted the mines, as they were some of the last miners to be part of the active coal mines in Cape Breton. My mother's side of the family, like I said, all came from the islands and highlands, and they found themselves cleared out of their land and wound up in Canada. They landed on the rocky shores of Cape Breton, or as I like to say, Scots on the rocks, and they wound up going back to a very rural lifestyle for the most part, in Inverness County, farming, really some subsistence, self-reliance farming until they began to prosper. And again, they moved on from there. Still a lot of connections to that area, but as the generations grew, they moved away. First moving to the larger cities and towns in Cape Breton, and then off the island and to Nova Scotia and elsewhere. That still doesn't answer the question, though. What does Scottish history mean to me? As I said, they came here for the clearances, and this is a really important part of Scottish history. In fact, when you get to understand it and you understand how these people were forced out of their houses, burned out of their houses in many cases, forced on the ships, and forced to go to somewhere they had never been before. This was by choice, not the leaving their community, in some cases leaving family behind, leaving their country, nor to the country that they were going to. Many of the Scots that were cleared landed in North America, primarily in Canada after the American Revolution, or New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. Basically, they wound up wherever the British Empire was. They were sent there to help settle and protect their colonies. It's really, when you look at it, these people, what they went through, I don't know if I could go through it. But through this all, and when they arrived in the new land, at least with my relatives and with many of the families that I've done research on, they retained those values that were important to them. Their faith, their family, their community, their service to others. In fact, my grandfather served in World War II for the Royal Canadian Highlanders, which is Canada's Black Watch. But these values were passed down to them from their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, and they've been passed down to me. In fact, those are values that I hold very dear to my heart. I can't think of things that are more important to me than my faith, my family, my community, my country. And they had to have learned it from somewhere. You have to go back even further in Scottish history so you can understand where they learned it from. The trials and tribulations and persecutions they went through at different times. Sometimes religious disputes, sometimes disputes with the English. Well, probably more times than not disputes with the English. Anyways, when you understand the history, you understand the strength of character they have. You understand the values that were passed down to you. I'm a Canadian Scot, well, at least 50%. And those values run through my blood. They're part of my DNA. They're part of who I am. And a big part of that is the history, because that's what made them. That helped create their values, their work ethic, their love for church and family and community. What does Scottish history mean to me? Like I said at the beginning, it means everything. It's in my blood. It's what makes me who I am today. Now, I have some Dutch friends, they like to use the expression, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. Well, I've often replied to that, you ain't a Scot, well, I guess you're not. But it's true. You are really a part, what your heritage is a part of you. It's an undeniable part. And yes, there were some good things in the history of the Scottish people, and there were some bad things. You have to take the good with the bad, but hopefully the good will outweigh the bad. It's an undeniable, unreconcilable part of who I am, is this Scottish side of me. And I'm proud of it. No, I don't always show it in the ways that he points out people show it by maybe wearing a kilt. I have on occasion, but really it's too cold in Canada. And I don't really have the legs for it. I don't celebrate Robert Burns Day by toasting the haggis. Though I do enjoy a really good bowl of hot oatmeal. And if you got a shortbread cookie, a really good, buttery Scottish shortbread, from the moment that first bite, you've won me over. We're friends for life. I've enjoyed black pudding now and then. Not so much recently. And yes, now and then, I have enjoyed a wee dram of whiskey. I mean, that was more then than now. But those aren't the things that make me a Scot. And one of the other things he mentioned in his video I wanted to address is he mentioned that about Canadian Scots, that many of them claim they're more Scottish than in Scotland. And I don't really want to speak to that because I don't know if it's necessarily true, but I do know that in the province of Nova Scotia, there are more Gaelic speakers than all of Scotland. Looking back in my own family history, like in 1901, and my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, she was in her early teens, and when her family was registered in the Canadian census that year, I look back at that, and on her page that her family's listed in, there's about, I want to say 40 to 50 entries maybe per page. 2, maybe 3 people do not list Gaelic as their first language. And these were people that were second and third generation Scots. So yes, there's a lot of Scottish heritage in Canada, particularly in Nova Scotia, and even more so in Cape Breton. There's a Gaelic college in Cape Breton. Where I am in Prince Edward Island, just down the road, there's a college of piping and Celtic arts. So yes, there's a lot of Scots and Scotch heritage. And a lot of times you'll go to things and you'll see people wearing kilts. That's not how I celebrate being Scottish. That's not how I celebrate Scottish history. I celebrate it by the way I act upon the values of my forebears, and I honor them through my faith, through my commitment to my church, my family, my community, and my country. And these are all things that are important to me. In fact, they were passed down from both my Scottish and Irish side, as both have a similar story to tell, having been forced out of their homeland for different reasons, to come to a new land and make a life for themselves. And I think anybody who looks back at their own family history will find those stories, will find those values that they share. And sometimes when you go looking, you'll find that your values and that they come from your roots. And that's why history should be important to you. That's why your family history should be important to you, because it shapes who you are. Just as having Scottish ancestors have helped shape who I am, when you search into your ancestry and find out their stories, you'll find out that it shaped you be who you are. So where are your ancestors from? What values did they have that they passed down to you? Let me know in the comments. And have you started researching your family history yet? If not, what's stopping you? Watch this video to help you get started on researching your own family tree.